December 17, 1944, the Ardennes forest lies silent beneath a thin layer of snow. Pine branches sag under the weight of frost, and the cold air carries the distant rumble of engines somewhere beyond the trees. Their breath rises in pale clouds as they watch the tree line ahead. Then it appears. A German armored vehicle slowly rolls out of the mist, its dark metal hull pushing through the quiet forest like a moving bunker. Machine gun fire erupts, forcing the American soldiers lower behind their cover. Bullets strike the vehicle's armor and bounce away with sharp metallic cracks. To the German crew inside, the outside world is visible only through a few small, rectangular windows of thick, bullet-resistant glass, vision blocks designed to stop rifle fire. For years, German crews had trusted these windows. They were strong, reliable, supposedly impenetrable to ordinary bullets. But among the American soldiers crouched behind the frozen wall, one man raises a scoped rifle and studies those tiny rectangles carefully. Because sometimes, on the battlefield, the smallest piece of armor becomes the most dangerous weakness. The trenches of the First World War had shown what static defense could become years of stalemate, armies frozen in mud and barbed wire. German strategists wanted something different. They wanted speed, movement, precision. A form of warfare where armored vehicles and coordinated infantry could break through enemy lines before defenders had time to react. This concept would later become known as Blitzkrieg Lightning War. To make this possible, Germany invested heavily in armored vehicle development during the 1930s. Tanks such as the Panzer III and Panzer IV were designed not only for firepower but for coordination. Crews needed to communicate quickly, react rapidly, and maintain constant awareness of the battlefield around them. But armored vehicles created a dangerous problem. The thicker the armor became, the less the crew inside could see. Inside a tank, visibility was extremely limited. Steel armor protected the crew from bullets, artillery fragments, and shrapnel, but it also sealed them inside a dark metal box. Without some form of protected viewing system, the crew would be almost blind. German engineers solved this problem with a technological compromise. They developed armored vision blocks made from layered bullet-resistant glass, commonly referred to as panzerglas. These blocks were installed in narrow viewing ports across armored vehicles in defensive positions. From the outside, they appeared as small rectangular windows embedded into the steel armor. Inside, they were a lifeline. These glass blocks were not ordinary windows. They were built from multiple laminated layers. Thick sheets of hardened glass combined with protective binding materials designed to absorb the energy of incoming bullets. But the internal layers were designed to stop the projectile before it passed through. In many cases, the glass was several centimeters thick. For German crews, the system worked remarkably well. Rifle fire from standard infantry weapons rarely penetrated these vision blocks. During early tests and field use, the glass proved strong enough to stop many types of small arms ammunition commonly used by Allied forces. The result was a viewing system that allowed crews to observe the battlefield while remaining protected inside armored vehicles. German armored cars, half-tracks, tanks, and even fortified defensive bunkers began using these vision ports. By the start of the war in 1939, they were already a standard part of German armored engineering. During the early campaigns in Poland and France, German armored units moved rapidly across open terrain. They allowed drivers to steer through chaotic battlefields, they allowed gunners to track enemy movements, and they allowed commanders to observe the front lines while remaining protected behind thick armor. To the crews operating these machines, the vision blocks became something they rarely questioned. They were simply part of the vehicle, another piece of engineering designed to keep them alive. As the war expanded across Europe and North Africa, German armored units continued relying on these viewing systems in every environment imaginable. From the deserts of Libya to the frozen plains of the Eastern Front, the small rectangles of armored glass remained the crew's only direct view of the world outside their steel hull. Because while the steel armor surrounding a tank could be many centimeters thick, the vision block, no matter how strong, was still made of glass. And glass, even armored glass, behaved differently under pressure. In the early years of the war, this difference rarely mattered. Few enemy soldiers had the opportunity or the time to carefully study such small details during the chaos of battle. But by 1944, the situation on the Western Front had changed dramatically. American forces arriving in Europe would soon begin fighting in environments very different from the open fields where German armor had first achieved its victories. Cities, narrow streets, dense forests, and close-range infantry combat. In these conditions, small details on armored vehicles suddenly became much easier to observe and much easier to study. Soon, American soldiers would begin looking much more closely at the smallest windows on German armor. And what they discovered would quietly change the way infantry fought armored vehicles. On June 6th, Allied forces launched the massive amphibious invasion known as the Normandy Landings, the opening assault of Operation Overlord. Hundreds of thousands of American, British, and Canadian soldiers poured onto the beaches of northern France, beginning the long push toward Germany itself. The early days of the invasion were chaotic and costly, and the fighting often unfolded in close quarters between hedgerows, villages, and narrow country roads. In these environments, German armored vehicles remained a serious threat. Tanks such as the Panzer IV and armored cars supporting infantry formations could suddenly appear along tight roads, or emerge from concealed positions in the dense Normandy countryside. For American infantry units advancing on foot, confronting these vehicles was a dangerous challenge. Heavy anti-tank weapons were not always immediately available. Units might carry bazookas, but these weapons required close distance and clear firing angles. In many situations, infantry soldiers were forced to hold defensive positions while waiting for heavier support. Meanwhile, the armored vehicles themselves were built to survive the very weapons infantry carried. Rifle rounds struck steel armor and bounced away harmlessly. Machine gun fire produced only sparks against thick metal plates. Even grenades were often ineffective unless placed very carefully, but the most dangerous advantage German armor possessed was not simply its protection. It was its ability to see. Even within a steel hull, tank crews relied on vision blocks and periscopes to monitor the battlefield around them. Drivers steered using narrow forward ports. Commanders observed troop movements through protected viewing systems mounted on turrets. Machine gunners inside armored vehicles tracked enemy infantry through small rectangular windows set into the armor. These windows were small, but they were critical. Without them, the armored vehicle would effectively become blind. American soldiers gradually began to notice this. During the long campaign through Normandy's hedgerow country, infantry units spent weeks studying German equipment in combat, destroyed vehicles, abandoned half-tracks, and captured defensive positions offered opportunities to observe the enemy's engineering closely. Soldiers examined armor plates, they measured thickness, they looked for joints, hinges, and mechanical weak points. Every bolt, every hatch, every moving part becomes something worth understanding. Because in war, even a small mechanical weakness can become a tactical opportunity. By late summer 1944, American forces were pushing deeper into France. German defensive lines began collapsing under the pressure of Allied air superiority, artillery, and continuous ground offensives. But as Allied forces advanced to understand why German crews trusted their vision blocks so deeply, it is important to understand how these windows were actually built. The glass used in many German armored vehicles was not ordinary glass. It was a layered defensive material designed specifically for military use. Engineers referred to it as panzerglas, literally armor glass. Armored glass used multiple laminated layers bonded together under high pressure. The outer layer was extremely hard. Its role was to absorb the initial impact of a bullet and spread the force across a wider area. Beneath it were thicker internal layers designed to stop the projectile completely. Some versions also used flexible bonding materials that helped prevent catastrophic shattering. In many cases, these glass blocks were several centimeters thick. During testing, they proved remarkably strong against standard rifle fire. When struck by bullets from typical infantry weapons, the outer surface might crack or fracture slightly. But the projectile would usually stop before penetrating through the entire structure. This made the glass ideal for vision ports. Unlike a simple viewing slit which left crews vulnerable to direct shots, the armored glass allowed German soldiers to observe the battlefield. While maintaining protection against most small arms fire, German armored vehicles such as the Panzer IV reconnaissance armored cars fixed defensive positions, especially the fortifications of the Siegfried Line, also incorporated similar systems. From an engineering standpoint, the design seemed sound, but like many protective technologies, it was built to defeat the average threat, not every possible one. And battlefields rarely behave like controlled laboratory tests, because while the glass itself could stop many bullets, the structure surrounding it was far more complex than it appeared. The blocks had edges, they were mounted inside steel frames. They were installed under mechanical stress as the vehicle moved across rough terrain, and most importantly, repeated rifle fire. The difference was small. But on a battlefield, even a small difference could become critical. Inside a German armored vehicle, the world was very different from what infantry soldiers experienced outside. The interior of a tank or armored car was cramped, loud, and often filled with the smell of fuel, oil, and hot metal. Steel walls amplified every sound, gear shifts, turret rotations, the clatter of shells being loaded. Visibility was extremely limited. Commanders often relied on small periscopes or rotating observation ports. Gunners focused primarily on their weapon sights rather than the surrounding battlefield. This meant that the crew's understanding of the outside environment depended entirely on a handful of small viewing systems. If those systems were damaged, visibility could disappear instantly. Many German tank crew manuals emphasized protecting these observation ports whenever possible. Some vehicles even included metal covers that could slide over vision blocks during intense combat. But closing those covers created another problem. Without visibility, the vehicle could not move safely. Drivers needed to see the road ahead. To the soldiers inside the vehicle, the glass represented security. It allowed them to observe enemy movements while remaining protected behind steel armor. Over time, many crews came to trust the system completely, but trust in battlefield equipment can be dangerous. Because once soldiers begin relying on a piece of technology, they rarely expect it to fail. For infantry soldiers on the ground, confronting armored vehicles was one of the most intimidating challenges of the war. A tank moving toward a defensive position created immediate pressure. Its machine guns could sweep trenches and buildings with devastating effect. Its thick armor made most infantry weapons useless at long range. Rifle bullets simply bounced off. Machine gun fire produced sparks against steel plates but caused little real damage. Only specialized anti-tank weapons, such as rockets, mines, or artillery, could reliably destroy a tank outright, but infantry units did not always have these weapons available. The goal often shifted from destroying the vehicle to neutralizing it. If the crew could no longer see clearly, the vehicle's effectiveness dropped dramatically. A blind tank could not aim accurately. A blind driver could not maneuver through narrow streets or forests. A blind commander could not direct supporting infantry. They began studying the smaller, more delicate parts of the vehicle. Periscopes, optical sights, machine gun mounts, and the narrow vision blocks made of armored glass. At first, these components seemed too small to matter. But for a skilled marksman with a steady rifle and a clear view, even a small target could become an opportunity. Across the Western Front, American snipers began experimenting with something simple. They started aiming not at the armor, but at the windows. The discovery did not come from a laboratory or a formal weapons test. It came slowly, across dozens of battlefields, through observation and quiet experimentation by soldiers who were constantly searching for any advantage they could find. American snipers and experienced riflemen often spent long hours studying enemy movement. They watched roads, rooftops, tree lines, and broken walls through telescopic sights, waiting for small signs of activity. The vehicles themselves were massive machines of steel, but scattered across their armor were delicate components that allowed them to function. These features became surprisingly clear. A sniper positioned several hundred meters away could often see the rectangular vision blocks on the front of a vehicle. The glass was thick. It had been designed to stop bullets, but battlefield curiosity can lead to experimentation. Some marksmen began testing their assumptions. They fired carefully aimed shots at the edges of the glass blocks or at the narrow frames that held them in place. Sometimes the bullet struck the surface and produced only a small crack. Even when the bullet did not penetrate completely, something important happened inside the vehicle. The crew's view could suddenly become distorted. A crack running across the surface of the glass might scatter light or obscure the narrow field of vision the crew depended on. And if multiple impacts occurred in the same place, the damage could spread quickly. Eventually, repeated shots sometimes shattered the outer layers entirely. The glass might not always allow a bullet to pass through, but it could still fail as a viewing system once the crew inside lost clear visibility. The vehicle's advantage on the battlefield began to fade. Inside the armored vehicle, the experience was very different. Tank crews were accustomed to hearing the sound of bullets striking armor. The thick steel hull often produced sharp metallic impacts when hit by small arms fire. Most of the time, these hits were nothing more than noise, but when a bullet struck the vision block, the sound was different. Instead of a metallic clang, there was a sharp cracking noise followed by the appearance of fractures spreading across the glass. For the driver or commander looking through that window, the change could be immediate and alarming. A small spiderweb crack might appear directly in the center of the viewing port. In some cases, fragments of the outer layer chipped away, scattering tiny shards inside the protective housing. Even if the bullet did not penetrate, the effect could be deeply unsettling. The crew's one reliable view of the battlefield had just been damaged. Inside the confined space of the vehicle, uncertainty spread quickly. Was the glass about to break completely? Would the next shot come through? Should the vision port be closed? Closing the port protected the crew, but it also reduced visibility to almost nothing. This forced commanders into difficult decisions. Some crews chose to shut protective covers over their vision blocks, relying instead on narrow periscopes or partial observation through other ports. Others attempted to maneuver the vehicle away from the sniper's line of fire. Either choice created hesitation, and hesitation on a battlefield filled with enemy infantry could be dangerous. Once American soldiers realized that vision blocks could be damaged or shattered with accurate rifle fire, the idea spread quickly through infantry units. Combat experience in World War II often moved faster than formal doctrine. Soldiers shared discoveries informally through conversations in trenches, briefings before patrols, or simple observation during combat. A sniper who had successfully cracked a vision block would mention it to others. Riflemen began paying closer attention to these small targets whenever armored vehicles appeared. The goal was not necessarily to destroy the tank outright. Instead, soldiers focused on something simpler, reducing its ability to see. If the driver lost his forward view, maneuvering became difficult. If the commander's observation port cracked, coordinating with supporting infantry became harder. If several vision blocks were damaged at once, the vehicle might effectively become blind in a complex battlefield environment. This approach was particularly useful in dense terrain cities, forests, and narrow roads where armored vehicles relied heavily on clear visibility to operate safely. Urban battles such as the Battle of Aachen and later fighting during the Battle of the Bulge placed tanks and infantry into extremely close proximity. At these distances, a skilled marksman could deliberately target vision systems with surprising accuracy. The tactic did not replace traditional anti-tank weapons, but it offered infantry something valuable in situations where heavier weapons were unavailable. It gave them a way to interfere with armored vehicles using nothing more than a rifle, patience, and careful aim. And as the war pushed closer to Germany's borders, these small moments of battlefield improvisation began adding up. Soon, in several engagements across the Western Front, American soldiers would put this knowledge to use during intense fighting. The results would reveal just how vulnerable even the most powerful machines could become when their crews could no longer see the battlefield clearly. October 1944. The fighting had reached the western edge of Germany itself. After months of brutal combat across France and Belgium following the Normandy landings, Allied forces were now pushing into German territory. One of the first major objectives was the ancient city of Aachen, a place of enormous symbolic importance to Germany. For American soldiers, the battle would become one of the first true urban sieges fought inside Germany during the war. Streets were narrow and choked with rubble. Buildings collapsed under artillery fire. German defenders turned basements, churches, and factories into strongpoints connected by tunnels and barricades. Every intersection became a potential ambush point. Armored vehicles moved cautiously through the shattered city. German units used tanks and armored assault guns to support infantry defending key streets. These vehicles advanced slowly, their engines echoing between stone buildings while machine guns swept upper floors and windows. For the American infantry trying to advance block by block, the presence of armored vehicles created constant danger. Anti-tank weapons existed, but they were not always positioned where they were needed. In tight urban environments, a tank could appear suddenly around a corner or emerge from behind a damaged building. Sometimes the only soldiers facing it were riflemen. In these situations, small tactical ideas could mean survival. American snipers positioned themselves carefully in upper floors of damaged buildings overlooking the streets below. From these elevated positions, they could watch German movements while remaining concealed among broken walls and shattered windows. Through a telescopic sight, a tank moving through a narrow street presented only limited targets. The armor plates were thick and nearly impossible to penetrate with a standard rifle, but the familiar small rectangles were visible again, vision blocks. A sniper lying quietly behind a broken brick wall might watch the vehicle approach slowly along the road. The tank commander could be partially visible through an observation port. The driver relied on the narrow viewing window directly in front of him to guide the vehicle forward. These small pieces of glass were the crew's connection to the outside world. The sniper adjusted his aim. The distance was not extreme, perhaps less than 200 meters. At that range, even a relatively small target could be hit. With careful control, the rifle fired. The bullet struck the armored glass with a sharp crack that echoed through the street. From the outside, the result might appear minor, a spreading fracture across the surface of the glass block. The bullet had not penetrated the armor. But inside the vehicle, the effect was immediate. The driver's narrow field of vision suddenly filled with jagged cracks. Light scattered across the fractured glass, distorting the view of the street ahead. What had been a clear observation port seconds earlier was now partially opaque. The vehicle slowed. A second shot followed moments later. Another impact struck the same vision block, expanding the fractures further across the surface. Small chips of glass broke loose inside the mounting frame. For the crew, the situation had changed dramatically. The driver could no longer see the road clearly. Rubble and debris scattered across the street made careful steering essential. Without reliable vision, moving forward risked crashing into obstacles or exposing the vehicle to anti-tank weapons waiting further ahead. The commander now faced a difficult decision: continue advancing with impaired visibility, or withdraw and find another route. While the crew hesitated, American infantry used the moment to reposition. Riflemen moved through adjacent buildings. A few seconds of lost visibility had created an opportunity. The tank eventually reversed slowly down the street, its engine growling as it backed away from the damaged observation line. For the American soldiers watching from their concealed positions, the result was clear. They had not destroyed the tank, but they had stopped it. Across the Battle of Aachen, similar moments began occurring more frequently. Snipers and riflemen targeted optical equipment whenever the opportunity appeared. Periscopes cracked, observation ports fractured. Machine gun sights shattered. Each damaged component reduced the crew's ability to see and react quickly inside the chaos of the city. The tactic did not win the battle alone. Artillery, infantry assaults, and heavy weapons still played the decisive roles. But the growing awareness of these vulnerabilities began influencing how armored crews approached urban combat. German commanders increasingly realized that their vehicles were facing a new type of threat, not from heavy guns. An even larger and more violent battle was about to erupt in the forests of the Ardennes. There, during the massive German offensive known as the Battle of the Bulge, armored vehicles would once again face American infantry hidden in forests and villages. This time, those soldiers already understood exactly where to aim. December 1944. Winter settled heavily across the Ardennes forest as German forces launched their last major offensive in the west, the Battle of the Bulge. The plan was ambitious. German armored columns would surge through the dense forests of Belgium and Luxembourg, split the Allied armies, and capture the vital port of Antwerp. If successful, the offensive could dramatically change the course of the war in Western Europe. To achieve this, German units relied heavily on armored vehicles moving through narrow forest roads and small villages. Tanks, assault guns, and armored half-tracks pushed forward through snow-covered terrain, often advancing quickly to maintain the momentum of the surprise attack. But the environment of the Ardennes created unique challenges. The forest was dense. Roads were narrow and winding. For American defenders scattered across the region, this terrain created opportunities. Infantry units positioned themselves along roadways, inside farmhouses, and within tree lines overlooking key routes. Some soldiers waited in concealed positions for hours or even days. Watching the roads through rifle scopes and binoculars, German armored vehicles moving through these areas were often forced to travel single file. When a tank appeared on a narrow forest road, its crew relied heavily on the small vision blocks mounted on the front of the hull and turret. These windows allowed the driver to follow the winding road while the commander scanned for enemy movement among the trees. But the forest created a dangerous situation for armored crews. Infantry hidden among trees could approach much closer than they could in open terrain. American riflemen and snipers positioned along the roadside sometimes found themselves only a few dozen meters away from passing vehicles. At these distances, even small targets became visible through magnified optics. The vision blocks stood out again. Small rectangles of glass surrounded by thick steel armor dot by this stage of the war. Many American soldiers already understood the vulnerability these ports represented. In several engagements during the Ardennes fighting, riflemen deliberately targeted these viewing systems whenever the opportunity appeared. A sniper hidden behind a fallen tree might watch a tank approach slowly along the icy road. The driver, focused on navigating the tight forest path, kept his eyes on the forward vision block. Inside the vehicle, the commander scanned the woods through a separate observation port. Then a shot rang out. The bullet struck the glass. Even when the round failed to penetrate completely, the impact could fracture the outer layer and distort the driver's view. In the confined environment of a forest road, losing visibility even partially could be dangerous. A tank traveling too quickly might slide into a ditch or collide with debris hidden beneath the snow. If the driver hesitated, the entire armored column behind him could be forced to slow down. A second shot sometimes followed, aimed at the same point. The commander could be forced to close the damaged port or rely entirely on secondary periscopes. Each moment of confusion slowed the advance. And slowing an armored column during a surprise offensive could have larger consequences. In several locations across the Ardennes, American infantry used these small disruptions to create larger defensive opportunities. When a leading vehicle stopped or hesitated, anti-tank teams, hidden further down the road, prepared their weapons. Bazooka operators waited for a clear shot at the side armor of the stalled vehicle. Artillery observers adjusted fire onto congested roadways. A single damaged vision block could sometimes trigger a chain reaction. The armored vehicle slowed. The column behind it compressed, and the hidden defenders gained precious seconds to act. German crews quickly became aware that their viewing systems were being targeted deliberately. Some units attempted to protect vision blocks by partially covering them during combat or by maneuvering vehicles at angles that reduced exposure. But these adjustments carried their own risks. Limited visibility made navigation through the forest even more difficult. Commanders had to balance protection with awareness, never fully certain where the next rifle shot might come from. As the battle continued through the freezing weeks of December and January, the German offensive gradually lost momentum. Fuel shortages, determined American resistance, and relentless Allied air attacks eventually halted the advance. But among the countless small engagements scattered across the forests and villages of the Ardennes, one lesson had become clear. Even the most heavily armored machines depended on fragile systems to function, and when those systems failed even briefly, the balance of power on the battlefield could shift. The realization would influence how soldiers thought about armored warfare for the rest of the war, because in combat, armor alone was never enough. A vehicle could be powerful. It could be heavily protected, but if the crew inside could not see the battlefield clearly, the machine could quickly become